Welcome to People Love Process. Like most people, I have my own specific preferences when it comes to my favorite music. Most of it is derived from the 1980s, but truth be told, my taste in music is pretty eclectic, to say the least. In my music library, I have everything from Gregorian chants to classical to blues to jazz to a cappella and a lot of other different kind of genres of music. So it's all over the map. But for this movie, I want to focus specifically on creating a classic 80s rock and roller. We're going to cover some core principles of vector building and, more importantly, hyper-focus on detailing methods that I use to pull off a more engaging final illustration. So with that, let's get started. Now, regardless of what style you're working on, ours is going to be a very kind of novelty-based of sorts, humorous, not necessarily a cartoon. It's the segmented style I like creating in. But you still want to look at real-world reference. You might be doing, let's say it's a logo, and you have the idea of doing a linear line logo, and the theme is a lion. You'd want to look at real pictures of a lion, not because your design's going to be realistic, linear line style isn't, but it might be proportionate to having the right shapes and forms be represented in your design. That applies to design and illustration. So it's why I picked these reference images to help me figure out how to draw what I needed to draw. Now, the 80s rock and roller had classic big hair, major guitars, and the Epic Beards by ZZ Top are one of my favorites from the 1980s. So let's take a look at my refined sketch. This is where I draw out. I'm not even showing you all the sketches that led up to this one, but I always go from a crude sketch, refine it, improve it until I have what I call a refined sketch that can act as a roadmap for vector building. So we'll go to transparency. I'm just going to knock this down to 20%. Oops, helps if I have it selected. There we go. And I'll lock the layer. And then all my layers on top of it are built out like this. Let's zoom in here. And you might notice as I'm hovering over areas of my layers, I have tooltips turned on. And I'm going to explain why I turn that on. Normally, I turn it off when I'm recording movies like this for my YouTube channel or my LinkedIn courses, because I think it's overkill when you hover over something like toggle lock. Like if you don't know what that is, then you might want to have it on if you first started using Illustrator. I don't care so much about this. Actually, I wish I could customize what it would show me. I use it because I like hovering over a color and getting that color information of what the color break is, in this case, CMYK. That's why I have it turned on. It's going to play a part in something coming up, so I just wanted to point that out. Now, a roadmap to build on. What do I mean by that? Well, if you work out and improve your drawing skills over time, you can figure out what shape and form your design or illustration is going to be before you ever create it in Illustrator. And as you're drawing it, if you think in shapes, it's going to help you be able to create those shapes once you get to Illustrator. So that's all I did, is I used my sketch as my roadmap. This style, of course, has what I call contour continuation. One shape informs on another shape, so your eye will visually flow through the design, flow through the visual illustration, in this case, of this 80s rock and roller. So if I turn that out, you can see the back of his neck goes into his back, into his leg, swings over, and intersects his other leg. So that's the fun nature of this style and why I enjoy it. Once I have this, I'll work out all my flat colors like this. I don't have any gradients or detailing yet. I'm just working out what flat colors will be combined to compose the base color of this illustration. Now, this is where I'll go in and I'm just going to turn on, actually, let's zoom in on the head first. We'll zoom in. So here he is screeching out his lyrics. Once again, all flat colors. no gradients, no blend modes being used to detail certain areas, but I'm going to turn on the head with that kind of content, and you can see it goes to more impactful kind of visual because I'm using gradients to create shape and form and put volume into these areas or push things back, like his hair. It goes from dark and it blends as a gradient blend that goes to a lighter value, whereas in the flat colors, it's just all dark. So that's how I'll go in and add that detailing. I'll use other blend modes like little sliver shapes like this to create the shading here. If I go to transparency, you see it's set for multiply and 30. So I just wanted to focus on that. We're going to go ahead and turn off our flat layers, and I'm going to turn on everything we need at this point, which is the shoes, the pants. We'll turn on his shirt and strap, the guitar, and his arms. But we're going to keep focusing on the face here, because one thing I want to point out to you is something you might have ran into. So I'm going to turn on our annoying layer, and I didn't misspell that. That's on purpose there, because this is something you might have run into. And I just want to explain it to you because for years, it didn't even work as good as it works now. And they've improved that because I'm not going to take credit for it, but I've been complaining about this from day one, is expected behavior in Illustrator is a term I often hear from Adobe engineers. So if I select this object with this color fill, if I go to my swatches, it's going to highlight that color. Well, you're using this color. Great. That's informative. That's helpful. If I select this one, it'll switch to that one and highlight that color. That's great. But if I select an object that has a gradient in it like this, and I select it, it has no color highlighted in swatches because it's a gradient. Okay, well that kind of makes sense. But if I go to the gradient panel and I click on it, it'll show you what the dark color is or the light color. You can select those. But when I select this, notice no color is being selected in swatches. If I select the dark one, no color is being selected in swatches. And I would complain about this to the Illustrator team for years. And they go, well, all you have to do is double click this. So if I double click it, I go, yeah, it gives me the information, but I still don't know what swatch it is. I have a lot of swatches up here that are variations of the same tonal family, and I still don't know which exact one it is. So it doesn't really help me. It just defines the specific break. And you might not have known about the double click on these. You can do it whether it's the dark or the light color to get that, but it still didn't define it. Well, eventually, what they expect you to do, and this is the part that it should be as intuitive as selecting a shape. And when you have the gradient tool, it should be smart enough to know if I select a specific color within a gradient, it should highlight it in the swatches. So if you need to do it, just make sure you select the object that's the gradient. Then, because it's a gradient, we're going to click on the gradient tool. And now, if I go ahead and highlight the dark color on this gradient tool like this, it'll highlight the swatch in the swatches panel. Or if I highlight the light one on the gradient tool, it'll do the same thing. And it'll also do it from the gradient panel, which it should just do it by default. So if I select the dark one, it switches to the dark one. This is the way it should work, whether you have the gradient tool selected or you have the selection tool. If you're going through the gradient panel, it should be smart enough to do this. But it's an inconsistent feature. That's the main problem with Illustrator. If the people developing Illustrator actually used it like they had an Illustrator on their team, he would probably notice, okay, it's not a huge pain point. It's just more efficient if they were consistent across the board. So I just wanted to point that out. Hence why I named this layer Annoying. Because it is annoying. And it wasn't always that easy. Years ago, even with the gradient tool, it wouldn't highlight it. So they have added that, so it has improved over time. I'll give them that much. So when I detail an illustration like this, I use gradients sparingly. I mean, for the nose, it makes sense because it's coming from a darker area under the the front part of his hair into his nose. That's great. If I select this, go to his cheek, go to the gradient tool, you can see how it goes from a lighter value as showing up here in my skin tones and going to a darker value in those skin tones. And that darker value tucks behind the little shape in his nose that's sitting on top of it. So it pops it out and gives it contrast. And then I use blend modes on little sliver shapes like this to form the detailing here. And all of those are using multiply. And I adjust the value of how strong that's going to be by adjusting the opacity. Same way I pulled off his nose here. We're going to go to this shape, which is another sliver shape, just the brown that's right here. And if we set this to multiply like that, and then we can adjust the value here, I think around 30, like that, then we can get a nice highlight that goes over his face, over his hair, and just adds some interest to that area as well. Gradients work when you want to do kind of simulate light effects. Now, of course, again, this isn't a realistic style, but let's say we want to adjust his mouth. So right here we have this base color of his mouth. All of these are mouth and tongue colors. These are skin tone colors, gray tones. Then I have hair and wood, red tones, and gold tones. So I organized my color palette like this so it was easier to understand where I need to go to select color. For a design like this, it makes sense. I don't always do this, but in this case, it is helpful. So we're going to take this and we're going to go to the gradient palette and we'll just click on the linear gradient. Again, we're going to select the light color here. We'll drop it into there. And I'm going to use the dark color here, the inside of the mouse, and drop it into here. We'll go to the gradient tool like this. And this is, you adjust how long it is, and then you can rotate it. So I'm going to do something kind of like this. I want to imply that as it's on the edge of the mouth, it's darker. Then it's getting out over here. You can adjust this. So I think I'm going to bring this one up and this one down like that. So now we've created a shadowing area here in his mouth. I think that looks good. Let's talk about a few more areas like on his tongue. Here's a little shape. And this is just going from, if I click on this pink color, you can see because we're using a global color, we've set it to a global color, we're just using a 55% tint of that pink, and then it's blending out to 0 opacity of the same tongue color, and that's how I do the little highlight on his tongue. Not hard, you just have to spend your time doing all this. In the ear, the ear shape right here, if I go ahead and click on this and just drag it out, you can see I have this shape where I combine part of his neck and the whole shape of the ear, just so I could put a shadowing that looks like it's coming from behind his side of his head into his ear to cast a shadow there. So those are all things that just add to the visual story we're trying to tell here. And lastly, let's zoom in on his guitar pick. I like using isolation mode. And if I click on this, you can see I have certain elements of his arms all combined into one shape. That way I won't accidentally move a shape, because if I move this a little, then I'm going to notice it because it's going to affect other areas. So this is a group. So I'll double click to go into isolation mode. I have the pick grouped again, so I'll go in again just to show you that I have this little sliver of white here just to give subtle volume to that guitar pick. So again, it just adds to the overall kind of styling and flair. So let's go into, that's how I'd use blend modes. That's how I'd use gradients to do some of the detailing. And one more area is his arm going over his guitar. I have this shape here, this shape, and notice these all broken up. Why do I use 3 shapes? I could have just done one shape that's gray over this whole area, but here's what I found. Certain values of color look better if you distinguish it with a warmer color. So that's why I changed, let's go ahead and go into this. That's why this one is a warmer red, this one's a cool blue, and this one for the brown is just using one of the brown hues. Now, it would be great if Illustrator came up with a new blend mode called shading, where I could just have one shape, and it was just because of AI, which they have now, they could figure out how to get this so that one shape would just automatically change value, and we could adjust the intensity and the value. And people, I know the illustration community would freak over having a new blend mode called shading. It would help so much, but every time I brought it up, it's deer in the headlights. They don't get it. So let's go over some other cool detailing methods. We're going to focus on his jeans now. So let's go ahead and zoom in on his legs. Of course, he has a ripped pair of jeans because it's cool looking. We're going to turn on a texture here. Let's zoom out a little bit so you can see all this. And I've just taken a real world denim texture and I've just scanned it in and placed it into Illustrator, and I'm just going to position where I want it. It's just going to make up the detailing on his legs. You might have to nudge it over a little bit. We have this shape that we're going to use to mask it, but before we mask it, let's select the denim texture, and we're going to go to blend mode under transparency, and we're going to set this to overlay. It'll interact with the colors underneath. The value right now is 100%. We want this to be a bit more subdued, so we're going to knock it down by half to 50, and I think that looks pretty good. Now, you always want to adjust these blend modes and transparencies to the actual object you're going to mask. You don't want to mask it first and then apply it to that, because as soon as you remove it from the mask, you lose all those details. So now we'll just take the mask shape, take the shape we've adjusted, and we'll mask it. If you don't have it, I have a keyboard shortcut set up. I can just hit F1 to mask it, and I'm going to do that. Just hit F1, and I have that set up as keyboard shortcut, so I don't have to go to Object, go down to Clipping Mask, and Make. I just hit F1, hence my keyboard shortcut. Now it's masked. That looks awesome. Let's turn on the other leg. We have that denim in there. This just adds a little more interest to our story. I've added some pant detail on top of it. So let's zoom in on the pants a little more, and I'll turn that on. And you can see I have this gradient just going over the back, just to add a little more darkness there. It has a multiply at 65%. We did the same here. This one's a little darker since it's going towards the back. We have this shape here again, which is just a gradient, but it's set to multiply in 70 with the cast shadow on top of it to create a nice shadow going over his legs. Now, this one is the same, but we don't have this set to multiply. If I pull this out, notice it doesn't look so great. It just looks gray. Well, it's a cool gray, which is why I use that. But as soon as we hit multiply on blend mode under the transparency palette, it looks so much better. And if you think it's a little too dark, we can always go in and adjust the value by adjusting the transparency. So I'll adjust this 15 to 85%. Knock 15%. That looks great. Again, we have a drop shadow over his leg to cast that shadow onto his leg, and that just looks a lot of fun. So that's how I'd use this kind of a real-world surface texture, which is jeans material, and apply it to his jeans. Let's go over one more area, and that is he's right now just it's almost like he's in a snowstorm. You can't see any of the background. So this is where I decided to put him into a context. And so I just found a really good stock image I could drop him into. So it looks like he's jamming on a stage and you see all the lights. He's in the midst of a concert. He's doing his own solo, whatever. And I thought this just added a nice narrative. Now, as I'm looking at it, it looks like he's kind of floating in the air. So we want to kind of base him, and that's what I want to go over now. So I'm going to turn on this reflection layer, and we're going to go over opacity mask. An opacity mask, you want to use black to create an opacity mask. Now, the color black you want to use, let's go to the gradient here, and we'll double click on it. You don't want to use a process black. You want to use just a solid 100% K black. And so that's all I've done here, and it's blending from black to white. White will be the transparency of this mask. The black will be the actual mask. And all we need to do is drag it over to cover the area we want to mask, which is like there, which is this bottom leg that we've just flipped downward. And now with both of those selected, we'll just go to transparency, and you'll see this button show up that says make mask. I'll click it, and now it's masked within that shape, and it looks like a reflection. I think we can make it look better by knocking this value down to 35%, because the reflection would be a little more diminished, and that looks really good. Now, we've already done that on the other areas for his other foot and the back part of the cable coming off. And I think this really kind of grounds him to that stage as if he's performing on. Now, the one thing, as I was looking at this, I'm always thinking, what else could I do to this? And I thought, well, there's a lot of light going on. I want it to interact with the character more. And I decided he needs to glow a bit. So I took all the base shapes in this illustration, combined them, did an offset to create this. And all we're going to do is we're going to go up to effects, and we're going to go to blur, and we're going to go to Gaussian blur. And let's see, what's 18? No, we need more. I think 24. Click it. And I think that looks pretty good. Now, if you wanted to knock it down so it's not 100%, you could, but I'm going to leave it because now it looks like he's being backlit by the stage lights. So I think this is kind of cool and adds to the overall visual narrative we're working on. Now, the next thing I want to go over is something that I'll admit I never use, and that is the flare tool. So I'm going to turn on this layer. We don't have anything on this layer, but this is where we're going to create it. If you go to your shapes and you click down to the flare tool, it doesn't say lens flare, but that's basically what it is. And it will bring up the lens flare tool. If we double click the lens flare tool, you have some settings here. Now, if you've never used this, and I don't use it enough to understand what all these settings are, I find it a bit convoluted and overcomplicated, but it is what it is. So we're not going to mess with this. We'll come back to this. I'm just going to click OK, and we're going to create a lens flare right above our artwork. We'll place it right about here, and this is what you're going to see. And if I deselect this, it's going to create a lens flare. Now, if I have it selected and double click the lens flare tool, it'll open up these, and now we can go ahead and adjust this. Oops, turn on preview like that. That looks a little better, I think. And maybe this could be shorter, maybe a little longer like that. So that's the rays, I guess, and how many rays you have. Diameter, this is sizing, opacity. I guess this would adjust the intensity. So maybe knock it down a bit like that. You can adjust other things. Here's the rings. So maybe, I don't know, let's go with less or more. Oh, it's randomizing. Okay. So it is somewhat random. You're never going to get the same results, I don't think, at each new interval. And we'll go ahead and click OK. And that's what you're going to end up with. This is the infamous lens flare tool. Now, the only thing I don't like about it is the one thing that kind of surprised me is I thought this was going to be a raster effect, much like the other raster effects, but it's all vector based. So if you double click into this, you start seeing all these weird shapes. And if you select them and you go to the appearance panel, all of these the transparency panel, all of these are using screen. So you can't really edit it from within that environment. You just have to do it through this menu. And because of that, that's where Illustrator starts feeling like a glove box to me. And a glove box is like, think of, Homer Simpson in the opening of The Simpsons where he's handling uranium rods and he has his hands through gloves in a box that's contained. That's the way it feels when you have the only controls you have on something is a pop-up menu. I don't like that. I like it when I can just click on things and adjust them, and because those menus so detach you that it in my opinion, it makes it harder to figure out. And the only thing I don't like about this is, well, I don't like that it's adding other colors. You see this cast of pink in it, and it looks okay as it goes over, but it looks okay. It's like, you might like it. I don't like this one right here. Let's see if we can get rid of that. I'm going to click into this, click this shape. I'm going to see if, okay, well, I can delete stuff. Okay, I like that better. So you can edit it somewhat. So that's the lens flare tool. I just wanted to show you that because if this was, let's say this was a photograph of the concert, you're going to get some of that flare going on from all the lights, and this is okay. Maybe it's just repositioning it to a better spot. Maybe we position it over a light. That might look more true to form, but I kind of like it over kind of interacting with the art. I don't really like this yellow it's adding in there. But anyway, that's how this works. I just wanted to show you that. And if you're doing this and you want to contain it within your composition, you'd have to mask it because in this case, it's going outside the composition. So I'd mask it on something like that. So it's not bad. It's just, that's the way I don't like how it's overlapping his face there with that color. So I'm going to show you something else that I created back when I worked at Upper Deck, a sports memorabilia company. Worked on Major League Baseball, NFL, NHL, and the NBA. It was a lot of fun job. A lot of cool stories. I might go over some of those sometime in a over-the-shoulder movie. But one thing I created is I create all these lens flares in Photoshop because most of my composition for the imagery that appeared on, let's say, baseball cards, there's times I wanted to use a lens flare because it just made something more dramatic. And so within the exercise files for this movie, you're going to find a PSD file, and it's a high-res one, and it's my lens flare set. And so I'm going to turn this on, and you can see these lens flares. The reason why I like these is because it doesn't add additional colors. It's just white, so you can use on any photograph, and it's not going to impede or add colors that don't go with the composition. So you can see if I turn this off now, let's go ahead and zoom in a little further like this. If I turn this off, without them, with them, and I think they look pretty cool. If I take this, I could align it with a light if I wanted to, like that. Doesn't matter really. I have two of them placed here, one coming from this side, one coming from this side. And yes, they overlap the art, but it's not degrading the art with the additional color that looks weird. So that's why I like just using, these are just pings. The PSD file has each of these on a transparent layer, and then you can port out whatever format you want. But I save them out as pings because a white ping works in traditional printing. It freaks out your pre-press people, but it does work. So that's what I did. So you could use this, or you can just bake your own, which I always prefer doing because I can customize it more. And then the next thing I want to show you is bokeh. Bokeh is when you get particles that are in the air and the light reflects off them. And I just thought this just added a little bit. It's nothing too over complex, but I just thought it added a bit. And then the last thing I want to show you is I always like bringing texture into things, but not so much to make something look degraded, old, or worn out. In this case, to add atmosphere. So we're going to take this, we'll align it with our artwork here. We're just going to color this white, but I'm obviously not going to leave this white. We're going to knock the value down to 30% transparent. Oops, let's go like that. And I thought just adding that gives that just a little atmosphere to the overall composition. Like there's things floating through the air, whatever. I just thought it looked, maybe 30 might be a little too much. Let's go back, select this. We could knock it down 10% more, maybe 20. So it could be very subtle, but I just think it looks better having a little bit of atmosphere like this. So this was a fun project to work on. I hope you can use some of these detailing methods. Opacity mask. The only thing I'd tell you about the opacity mask, like we used in the reflections for this character, is you'll want to rasterize your artwork and not try to print it out from a vector file. Because for whatever reason, I've never had very good end results when I utilized opacity mask and printing directly from an AI file. They never work that great. But if I took this existing artwork and saved it out, it just saved it as is, and then dragged it onto Photoshop and rasterized it at like 600 ppi, it would look fine. So that's what I'd probably do. Now, have you ever wondered what makes creativity more sustainable? Well, one huge thing, in my opinion, is pursuing ideas and subjects you really enjoy. It's far easier to work in areas you already spend time in, so figure out what you love, that is, and focus on creating something derived from that enjoyment. That's going to make whatever you work on, whether it's a design, whether it's an illustration, sustainable for you, and that's how you improve. Don't wait for somebody to hire you. If you have an idea, do it on your own. That's how you improve. Remember, the exercise files for each of my People of Process movies can always be accessed via a link in the description below, and all the resources I showed in this movie are included in the source files, such as the set of lens flares in a PSD file that you can access. Thank you again for those who have become members of this channel. From what I read, even a simple like on my channel helps me to grow this channel. I appreciate your interaction in any way because it helps me to continue producing original creative content I can share with you. Until next time, thank you for watching People of Process. And as always, I hope this content helps you improve your own creative process.